Welcome to part 2 of our series, Biological Bases of Behavior. Today, we're going to build the incredibly complex machine of human behavior piece by microscopic piece. If you've ever found yourself wondering why you do what you do, feel what you feel, or think what you think, well, the answers don't just exist in the abstract mind. They start right here, deeply rooted in your very own biology. Before we really get going, I want you to sit with this for a second. How does a tiny, microscopic bundle of cells actually create your thoughts, your deepest fears, your favorite memories? Bridging that gap between squishy physical matter and conscious experience. It's kind of the ultimate puzzle, right? So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the cellular level, then we'll zoom out to the system level. After that, we'll tackle the blueprint level, and finally, the interface level. Let's get right into it. Starting right at the foundation, Section 1, the cellular level, focusing on neurons and neurotransmitters. Okay, so neural communication happens in a ridiculously fast sequence. First up, the branch-like dendrites receive chemical messages from other neurons. They pass that intel along to the soma, the cell body, which basically makes the call on whether to fire. If it does fire, it sends a brief electrical charge called an action potential, zooming down a long fiber called the axon. And here's the cool part. This operates on an all-or-none principle. It literally fires with full force like a lightning bolt, or it just doesn't fire at all. No in between. Finally, that signal reaches the endpoints, releasing chemical messengers across a tiny microscopic gap called the synapse. Now, those chemical messengers crossing the synapse, those are your neurotransmitters, and they dictate, well, pretty much everything about how you function. Acetylcholine handles your muscle action and memory. Dopamine, you've probably heard of it, is heavily tied to your brain's reward and attention systems. Serotonin steps in to regulate your mood and sleep. And you know when you get that runner's high after an intense workout and suddenly you feel unstoppable and pain-free? Yeah, that is your endorphins at work, just flooding the synapse. It's honestly a delicate chemical symphony happening millions of times a second inside your head. Zooming out a bit, we hit Section 2, the system level, looking at the nervous system and the brain. So your peripheral nervous system has this automatic, involuntary branch called the autonomic nervous system, and it's divided into two constantly competing forces. The sympathetic system is basically your body's gas pedal. It arouses you for fight or flight the second you perceive a threat. On the flip side, the parasympathetic system is the brake pedal, calming you right back down to rest and digest so you can conserve energy. The crucial takeaway here is that your nervous system is in this constant tug of war, balancing you between these two states. It fires you up so you can dodge a baseball flying at your head, and then thankfully calms you down afterwards so you can recover. To really grasp the older, survival-based parts of our brain, it helps to use a few everyday analogies. Down deep inside your brainstem, you've got the medulla. Think of it as your body's backup generator, just automatically keeping your heart beating and lungs breathing without you ever having to think about it. Right above that sits the thalamus, acting like a super busy airport air traffic controller. It receives sensory flights and routes them exactly where they need to go in the brain. Then, in the limbic system, you have your amygdala, which fires off like a loud internal alarm system for fear and aggression. And right next door is the hippocampus, basically your dedicated filing librarian, actively organizing and storing away all your new conscious memories. Now, draped over all those older survival structures is the wrinkled outer layer we call the cerebral cortex. This is where the complex magic happens. It's divided into four main lobes. Your frontal lobes, right behind your forehead, handle things like your personality, your judgment, and they house the motor cortex for voluntary movement. The parietal lobes on top process touch and temperature. The occipital lobes, all the way at the back, handle your vision, and the temporal lobes, sitting just above your ears, process sound and language. So if you pick up a hot coffee mug and feel the warmth, that's your parietal lobe. But when you actually make the decision to take a sip, that's your frontal lobe taking charge. And the complexity doesn't stop there. Your cerebral cortex is actually split down the middle into two halves that specialize in completely different things. We call this lateralization. The left hemisphere generally runs point on logic, math, and crucially, speech production and comprehension. Meanwhile, the right hemisphere is dominating your spatial awareness, recognizing faces, and driving your artistic expression. But here is the kicker. These two highly specialized halves are constantly talking to each other across a thick band of neural fibers called the corpus callosum. They seamlessly share hard logical data from the left and creative spatial data from the right to give you one unified, coherent experience of the world. All right, moving on to Section 3, the blueprint level, where we get into genetics and evolution. Which brings us to a massive question, one that sits right at the heart of the classic nature versus nurture debate. Is your personality hardwired by your DNA? Are you basically just playing out a pre-written script dictated by your biology? It is absolutely essential to understand exactly what our genes do, and honestly, just as importantly, what they do not control. To untangle this, researchers use a concept called heritability. Now, there is a very common misconception out there that high heritability means your personal destiny is completely 100% hardwired. Not true. In reality, heritability is just a statistical measure of variation among individuals within a given population. It ranges from 0 to 1. It doesn't mean a specific trait in you is completely unchangeable. It just explains how much of the differences we see in a whole group of people can be chalked up to their genetics. So, how do we actually figure all this out? Well, researchers use brilliant methods like twin studies, where they compare identical twins who share exactly 100% of their genes to fraternal twins who don't. They also rely on adoption studies, comparing children to their biological parents versus their adoptive parents, which is a great way to cleanly separate genetic variables from environmental ones. Also, thanks to evolutionary psychology, we know that many of our behavioral traits, like, say, an innate fear of snakes or heights, have deep evolutionary roots that were literally designed to keep our ancestors alive so they could reproduce. But if there's one major takeaway here, it's gene-environment interaction. Your biology and your environment are never ever working in isolation. They are constantly dancing together. Finally, let's head into Section 4, the interface level, focusing on sensing and perceiving the world around us. To really get this, we have to split the whole process into two distinct parts, sensation and perception. Sensation is a bottom-up process. It is simply your physical receptors gathering raw, unfiltered data, like light waves bouncing into your eyes or sound waves hitting your ears. Perception, on the other hand, is a top-down mental process. Sensation is your eyes gathering those raw light waves, but perception is your brain instantly interpreting and organizing those light waves so you immediately recognize the face of your best friend smiling at you. Now, your sensory systems are incredibly smart. Because they are constantly bombarded with data all day long, they use a clever trick called sensory adaptation. This is a diminished sensitivity to a constant, unchanging stimulus. Think about it. This is exactly why you don't actively feel the clothes resting on your skin all day, or why you eventually stop noticing the loud hum of your refrigerator. Your nervous system basically adapts to constant stimuli and tunes them out. Why? So it can stay on high alert for new, potentially dangerous changes in your environment. Through a vital, almost magical process called transduction, your specific biological receptors take physical energy and translate it into neural impulses. For example, your eyes use rods and cones to process light into color and detail. Your ears use fluids sloshing around inside the cochlea to turn sound vibrations into pitch and frequency. Fascinatingly, your sense of smell, or olfaction, is actually the only sense that completely bypasses the thalamus. Remember that air traffic controller we talked about earlier? And routes directly to your emotion and memory centers. That is exactly why a specific smell can instantly trigger a super vivid childhood memory out of nowhere. And your vestibular sense? It relies on these semicircular canals in your inner ear just to keep you standing upright and perfectly balanced. So once all that transduced sensory data finally hits the brain, how do we actually make sense of it? Well, Gestalt psychology tells us that our mind instinctively organizes these random, fragmented pieces of data into meaningful wholes. We naturally use grouping principles. We establish figure ground, so an object clearly stands out from its background. We group things by proximity and similarity. We even use a trick called closure to mentally fill in the gaps of a broken image just so we can see a complete whole object. We are literally wired to find order in the chaos. But, and this is a big but, you have to remember that your personal perception of reality is highly subjective. Your unique past experiences, your specific culture, even your mood on a given day, they all combine to create what's called a perceptual set. This is a mental predisposition to perceive one thing and not another. It totally primes you to see the world in a way nobody else does. Two people can look at the exact same physical event, receive the exact same raw sensation, but perceive two entirely different meanings, just based on their own personal expectations. As we wrap up this explainer on the biological basis of behavior, I want to leave you with a profound thought on epigenetics. We've talked a lot about neurons and genetic blueprints today, but epigenetics shows us that your experiences, your stress levels, and even your diet can literally attach chemical tags to your DNA, turning specific genes on or off. Yes, your biology built you, but your daily environment and your habits are constantly rewriting the active code. which leaves us with a pretty thrilling realization to ponder. If your lifestyle can physically alter how your genes are expressed, are you ever truly done being built?